Hi you guys, this extension is going to be one where you learn to solve equations that have either fractions or decimals in them, and you learn a skill of being able to just clear out the fractions or clear out the decimals so that it makes doing the math by hand a little bit easier. So the very first thing that you want to do is when you have an equation that's full of fractions, and we've been working on solving these for the past couple of days. But if you have an equation that has fractions, the very first thing you want to do is you want to look at all of your terms and you want to find the least common denominator for all of the terms. So when we look at this equation right here, we can see that this term's denominator is 2, this one's 4, this one's 4, and this one's 2. So 4 would be the least common denominator. And so what we do is we go ahead and we multiply every term in the equation by 4. So you can see that when we multiply 4 over 1 by 3 over 2, that gives us 12 over 2, which then simplifies to a 6. When you multiply 4 over 1 by 3 over 4, that ends up giving you the 12 over 4, which is really just 3. So you end up with a 3x. And then 4 over 1 times 1 over 4 is going to be 4 over 4, which is the same as 1x. And then for the last one, 4 over 1 times by a negative 1 over 2 ends up giving you a negative 4 over 2, which is the same thing as having a negative 2. Now, when you look at this equation right here, and then this equation right here, you need to realize that these are exactly the same equation. It's just that we multiplied everything in the equation by the same thing, so it kept it equal. It's just that now we have an equation that doesn't have any fractions in it, which is going to be a lot easier to solve. Okay, so let's start with practicing some equations that have fractions and clearing out those fractions. So when both of the resulting equations are equivalent to the original equations, but they are much easier to solve, the easier way to clear an equation of fractions, and we're going to get to the decimal part later, but the easiest way to clear an equation with fractions is to multiply the entire equation by the lowest common denominator, which in math, that is the same thing as the least common multiple. Okay, so when you're trying to clear out fractions from an equation, you want to find the least common multiple, and then you multiply every single term in the equation by that least common multiple. So on this particular part of your notes, all we're doing here is practicing finding the least common multiple. I'm pretty sure that if you're watching this video, this is a skill that you already know, but I'm just going to review it in case you don't. So least common multiples of 3 would be 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, and then 21. I think that's going to be high enough actually. And then 6 times 1 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12, 6 times 3 is 18, 6 times 4 is 24, 6 times 5 is 30, and I think that should be enough. And then multiples of 9. 9 times 1 is 9, 9 times 2 is 18, 9 times 3 is 27. Least common multiple would be the smallest number that they have in common, and in this case our least common multiple is going to be 18. See how that's the smallest number that all three of these have in common? So that would be the number that you would multiply all of the terms by, would be that least common multiple. Let's do number 4, 2, 3, and 5. So the multiples of 2. 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times 4 is 8, 2 times 5 is 10, and then we've got 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. I think that's going to be high enough. And then for 3, we would have 3, and then 6, and then 9, and then 12, and then 15, and then 18, and then 21, and then 3 times 8 is 24. Okay, and then for 5, we would have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. And actually, as I'm looking at this list, it looks like we need to go higher because I've got a 20 here and I've got a 20 here, but I don't have a 20 here, right? So the least common multiple is actually going to be a 30. That would be the smallest number that all 3 of these have in common as far as their multiples go. So you'd have to multiply everything by 30. Okay, so I hope that that makes sense as far as finding least common multiples. So you list out the multiples, you find the smallest number that they have in common, and then that is your least common multiple. And after you figure out what that is, after you figure out what the least common multiple is, then you're going to multiply every term in the equation by that least common multiple, and then you simplify the equation and solve as usual. So let's go ahead and look at number 7. You can see that the denominator of this 5 would be a 1. The coefficient of this x is a -1. The denominator would be a +1, and then the denominator of the 20 would be a 1. So if we're going to solve this equation by clearing the fractions first, we really only have one fraction here, but we can multiply all of the terms in this fraction by the least common multiple, and it'll get rid of at least that one fraction. So the least common multiple between 1 and 3 is going to be a 3. So I'm going to take and multiply the 5 by a 3. And I'm going to take and multiply the 2/3 x by a 3. And I'm going to take and multiply the -1x by a 3. And I'm also going to take and multiply the 20 by a 3. So the trick about this is every single term in the equation has to be multiplied by that least common multiple, even the ones that don't have a fraction. So this ends up giving us 15 plus, if I take 3/1 and I multiply by 2/3, I get 6/3. This 3/3 can cancel to a 1. Either way you think about it, that ends up being a 2x. 3 times -1x is -3x, and then 3 times 20 is 60. Okay? And then you just go ahead and solve the equation that you have left, just like you already know how to do. Let's go ahead and look at number 9. I'm going to go ahead and clear out this one, and we'll go ahead and look at number 9. So, first step is to identify your least common multiple. So we want to look at all of our denominators. So this one's an 8, this one's an 8, this one's a 2, and this one's an 8. So we want to find our least common multiple between 2 and 8. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 8, 16. Well, we already have it. It would be 8. That would be our least common multiple. So I'm going to take and multiply the 8 by 5/8 n. I'm going to multiply the 8 by a -3/8. Okay, notice how there is a subtraction sign in front of this term, so you have to remember that that's a -3/8. And then I'm going to multiply the 8 with the 1/2 n, and I'm going to multiply the 8 with 7/8. Okay, so when I take 8/1 and I multiply by 5/8, this is going to be 40/8, which is 5, or you could say 8 goes into 8 once. 1 times 5n is 5n, fraction gone. If I multiply the -3/8 by 8, that's going to be 8 times negative 3, which is negative 24. 1 times 8, which is 8. Negative 24 over 8 is negative 3. Or I could say 8 goes into 8 once. 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. Fraction gone. 8 times 1/2 is going to be a 4. And then 8 times 7/8 is really just going to cross cancel to be a 7. And then I just have this easy fraction, or easy equation to solve that doesn't have any fractions. So let's go ahead and I'm going to show you a couple more of these, and then I'm going to have you practice some of these on your own. So for number 11 on your notes, I think it's easiest if you, if there's anything to be distributed, to distribute and then find your least common multiple. So if I take 1/3 times by 6, that's going to give me a 2r. 1/3 times 9 is just going to be a 3. 1/2 times 2r is just going to be a 1r, and then 1/2 times 5 is going to be a 5/2. And now the only term that has a fraction is the 5/2. And so if I want to clear the fraction out of this equation, I need to find the multiple, the least common multiple for 1 and 2, which would be 2. So I'm going to times 2 by everything on this side, and I'm going to times 2 by everything on this side. So 2 times 2r is 4r, 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times r is 2r, and then if I take a 2/1 and I multiply by 5/2, that's going to end up giving me a 5, and now I have an equation that's super easy to solve with no fractions. Okay, so that's how you clear fractions from equations. And now I'm going to go back and talk to you about how to clear decimals from equations. So we're going to do this next part of the notes. When you're clearing decimals from equations, you want to look at the place value, and you decide what to multiply by based on what the place values. So when we look at this one, this is the 10th place, this is the 10th place, this is the 10th place, this is the 10th place. So because each value in this equation goes to the 10th place, if I multiply by a 10, that's going to shift the decimal. Let me show you here. If I multiply a 10 by 0.8, that shifts the decimal 1 place to the right so that I now have an 8 instead of a 0.8. If I multiply the 10 by 1.9, it's going to shift the decimal 1 to the right, which gives me a 19. Same thing here. If I multiply by a 10, that's going to give me a negative 4x. And then if I multiply 5.5 by 10, that's going to give me a 55. And so now we have an equation that's much easier to solve that doesn't have any decimals. This skill would come in handy, especially if you don't have a calculator. And sometimes, to be honest, it's a lot quicker to just do the math by hand versus typing everything into a calculator. So let's go to some of the practice problems where we clear decimals. Okay. So if you have numbers that are to the 10th place, you're going to multiply the equation by 10. If you have decimals that are to the 100th place, you're going to have to multiply by 100. And if you have decimals that are both to the 10th or the 100th place, then you have to multiply by the least common decimal. So it would have to be the 100th place. So like on this one, for example, right here, okay, you can see that this is the 10th place, this is the 10th place, this is the 10th place, this is the 10th place. So you're going to multiply every term in the equation by 10. So let me show you how that works. So we're going to do 10 times by 0.3x plus 10 times by 0.2 plus 10 times by 0.6. And then we'll have plus 10 times by 0.5. 4x. So if I multiply 0.3 by 10, I'm just going to get a 3x. If I multiply a 10 by 0.2, I'm just going to get a 2. If I multiply a 0.6 by 10, I'm just going to get a 6. Sorry, this should have been, I need to fix this right here. This should have been an equal sign, not a plus. So there was an equal sign here, and then, sorry, this right here needed to be an equal sign instead of a plus. You guys probably caught that while you were watching. And then plus, this would be 4x. And then from there, you can just go ahead and solve this equation. So that is an example of one where they are all in the tenths place. And then number 14 is an example of one where you have this one to the tenths, but this one's to the hundredths. This one's to the tenths, but this one's to the hundredths. So you're going to have to multiply everything by 100 in order to clear out the decimals here. So we take 100, we multiply by the 1.7g, plus we take 100, we multiply by the 0.32, equals, we take 100, we multiply by the 0.4, plus we take 100, we multiply by the 1.62g. So on this one right here, the 100 times by 1.7, I'm going to have to shift my decimal 2 places to the right, which gives me 170g, plus 100 times 0.32 gives me 32. 100 times 0.4, I'm actually going to have to shift that 2 places to the right, so that's going to give me a 40. And then 100 times by 1.62 is going to give me 162g. And then we just go ahead and solve this equation that we have left. But in order to get rid of our decimals, whatever the smallest place value is, since this is the hundredths, then you've got to multiply everything by the hundredths. So if we go ahead and look at number 15, this is hundredths, this is tenths, this is hundredths. This is just going to be 0.0, but we still have to multiply that one as well. And then this one is tenths. So because we have a couple of these that are to the hundredths place value, we're going to have to multiply everything by 100. So basically I can take and multiply everything on the left side by 100. And I can take and multiply everything on the right side by 100. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me an equation that doesn't have any decimals in it. So if I do 100 times by 0.22, I'm going to get 22h. 100 times by negative 0.6 is going to be negative 60. 100 times by 0.12h is going to give me 12h. And then 100 times by 3 is going to give me 300. This is the one that you have to be super careful of. Even though this one doesn't have a decimal, everything in the equation has to get multiplied by that either least common denominator or the least common decimal. And then 100 times by negative 0.8 is going to be a negative 80h. And then we would just go ahead and solve this equation from there. Okay, so now you've learned a new skill. And what I want you to do next is you are going to do the practice part that starts with it says solving equations. It's the second part of this, solving equations and inequalities, clearing fractions and decimals practice. So we didn't go through all of the notes, and that's okay. Just go ahead and skip through to the practice. The first few questions have you find the least common multiple, and then the next set of equations have you clearing the fractions first, and then I actually do want you to solve. So I want you to clear the fractions. I want you to find the solution, and then you're going to do that for fractions, and then the next set of problems you solve by clearing the decimals first. And then once you're done with those, I want you to bring them back to me so I can check them off with you, and so that you can also get a treat. You guys are awesome. Good job.